Have you ever been in a situation where it just seemed like there was no way out and no way through? In recent weeks, I've been in conversation, as has Mimi Horowitz, with people who have been kind of stuck in the morass of the medical system. And you know, when our medical system works well, that's wonderful. But it can be kind of a quagmire, and if you get stuck in the middle of it, in this system, it can just swallow you alive. I'm reminded about the story of the three nurses who died and went to heaven, and they each, in their own time, met St. Peter. The first one had her interview with St. Peter, getting ready to make her entry into heaven. And Peter asked her, well, what did you do? And she said, well, I was an emergency room nurse. And he said, oh, that's wonderful. You help people, save them from death. And what a wonderful thing. You're in. Come on in. And the next nurse came in, and she said, well, I was a hospice nurse. And she said it was kind of depressing, but it was so fulfilling and rewarding to be with people in the final days of their life. And St. Peter said, well, that's great. You did a wonderful thing. Come on in. And so the third nurse came in, and St. Peter said, well, what kind of nurse were you? And she said, I was a managed care nurse for an HMO. So St. Peter, he gets out his calculator, his pen, his pencils, all these manuals. He starts scribbling notes. About an hour later, he's crumpling papers, making notes. About an hour later, he comes back and says, okay, you're approved for a 5-day stay. Anyway, I know some of you are in the middle of that now, trying to navigate your way through some very difficult challenges with your health. And we have resources here at this church for you to help you. But I know there are times in our lives when we have felt like there's just no way out and no way through. And so this morning I want to do part 2 of my sermon, taking the title from Jim Marsh's sermon of April 2002, Where Do We Go From Here, with the subtitle, When Things Seem Impossible. And I want to use as my text the story of the crossing of the Red Sea, the book of Exodus, chapter 14. Now, most of us know the general outline of the story, and in our minds, we probably have what I call kind of a Charlton Heston image of this story. You have all of these Israelites, hundreds and thousands, if not millions of them. In actuality, there are probably only 30 or 40,000 at the most, maybe 10 or 15,000 that actually crossed out into the wilderness. But the Charlton Heston version is a little different. You have hordes of Israelites, and then you have hordes of Egyptians following through this big trough of water. You have the image in your mind. The water's almost standing on edge. And then you have the Israelites passing through safely, and then the water coming and crashing down on the Egyptians and their chariots. Well, there's been a lot of argument, theological argument, over the historical accuracy of the account. Some would say that this crossing was really a crossing of the Gulf of Suez. Others have said it was simply a low, marshy area, only a few inches deep. And the fundamentalists accusing the liberals of being doubting rationalists, and the liberals accusing the fundamentalists of being naive literalists when it comes to the story. But really, what's important about this story are not the historical details, but the profound and timeless truth that we can glean for any of us who claim to be sojourners in the life of faith. And I think if we open our minds to interpret the story metaphorically, we might be surprised how powerful and transforming this story can be for our lives. Again, just to refresh you on the background of the story, the Israelites had been in bondage to the Egyptians for many, many years. These harsh taskmasters, and they had prayed to their God Yahweh for release, and finally God hears their prayers and says, this is how I'll do it. I'm going to send 10 plagues. And you remember the plagues. The frogs, the locusts, the boils, the hail from heaven that came and wiped everything out. And if this story were to take place today in 2008, I'm sure God would say something like this: I have good news and I have bad news for you. The first part is the good news. After all of these plagues and the frogs and the hail and everything, I'm going to set the people free. The bad news is this, Moses: before I send all the plagues, you're going to have to complete an environmental impact study. Well, God did it. God did it. He sent the plagues, and Pharaoh relented, and he set the people free. But you know, it wasn't long before he changed his mind, and he went charging after them in the wilderness. And you remember the story. Here the Israelites, their backs against the wall, sheer cliffs on three sides, water on the other side, nowhere to go, no way out. Which way do we turn? Where do we go from here? And in the middle of their dilemma, they hear three very distinct and conflicting and ambivalent voices. The first voice saying this: go back and serve the Egyptians. The second voice saying, stand still. And the third voice saying, go forward. The first voice was this, and this was the voice of the people to Moses: go back and let us serve the Egyptians. Oh, we didn't really have it so bad back then. At least when we died, we had graves to be buried in. At least we had food every day. At least we had a place to lay our heads. You know, it's funny how our memories are so selective. We romanticize the past. We have these nostalgic longings for the past. Our memories are so selective. We only remember the good stuff. I saw a great commercial last week. It took place on a golf course. And there was a young man, late teens, early 20s, getting ready to drive a ball, and his older father, the older, wiser father, standing nearby, watching him prepare for his swing. And between the young man and the green was this giant oak tree. And the young man's kind of befuddled and wonder how he's going to play the shot. And the father says, you know, when I was a man your age, a young man your age, he said, I drove that ball right over that tree and right onto the green. And he said, you can do it, son. And he gets back and takes his time, makes the shot, and the ball lands right in the middle of the tree, hits a branch, and falls onto the ground. And his father kind of smirks and slyly says, oh, son, I forgot to tell you, when I was a young man, that tree was only 6 feet tall.